There was a surprise Star Wars story released as an Audible exclusive. I had no prior knowledge that this story was even coming. Even better, if you have an Audible membership, there's no additional charge. Padawan's Pride is a short story written by Bryan Q. Miller and expertly performed by Kevin Kemp. The short story takes place a few years after the events of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. A 12-year-old Anakin Skywalker is early in his apprenticeship under newly knighted Obi-Wan Kenobi. The Jedi Council sends the pair on a mission, possibly their first mission, which tests each of them in their relatively new roles. A Republic spy has gone missing on one of the moons of Varl. The Jedi Council tasks Obi-Wan Kenobi and his Padawan Anakin Skywalker with infiltrating an underground podrace put on by the Pike Syndicate with the cooperation of a Hutt. The Syndicate is thought to be holding the Republic spy as a prisoner. Anakin and Obi-Wan go undercover, but circumstances will eventually separate them. Their interpersonal relationship is strained, and each is filled with doubt in their ability to complete the mission. The story starts in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Brief appearances by Yoda and Mace Windu help to set the timeline of the story before Anakin is specifically said to be 12 years old. Anakin, at this time, is disillusioned with his role in the Jedi Order. The full schedule of study and coursework isn't what he wants. He wants excitement. Hard to blame any 12-year-old for wanting something physical to do, especially Anakin, whose earliest experiences with the Jedi were in pod racing, winning his freedom, and participating in a literal war. There was a cool nod to Anakin's power here, as his frustration can literally pulsate out of him and the physical world is affected around him. The wounds of Qui-Gon's death are still very fresh, especially for Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's gone back to the familiar place he spent much of his apprenticeship under Qui-Gon, the library. He's been trying to gather information on Maul, who he was, and the Rule of Two. I say was because at this time, Maul is presumed dead. Obi-Wan wants the answer to the question posed at the end of The Phantom Menace. Was Maul the Master or the apprentice? There was a little something here that brushed up against me the wrong way. In Obi-Wan's introduction, the narration refers to him having a hard time adapting to having a Padawan of his own while finishing his trials to become a knight. My understanding was always that the things he went through in The Phantom Menace were considered his trials. He helped liberate a planet, he served his master dutifully, he embodied everything it meant to be a Jedi, and he was the first Jedi in 1,000 years to face down a Sith. It's a small detail in the course of the story, but it's kind of a big one for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Every conversation Obi-Wan and Anakin have in the intro of the story, and really right up until the end, has Obi sounding a lot like Qui-Gon in many ways. I thought this was a cool detail until the very end when things shift a bit. I appreciate the character's arc in this short time. The Pike Syndicate runs a popular underground pod race with the help of a Hutt. Traditionally, these two crime syndicates don't get along. There's a cool but brief mention of the 5 crime families of the galaxy. Obi-Wan and Anakin are chosen for this mission because of Anakin's obvious connection to the sport. I like to try to experience Anakin's stories in the same period that they're set in, but I can't quite stop myself from tallying everything that contributes to his ultimate fate. Anakin is plagued by previous attachments, given his age and emotional nature. Putting him that close to something from his past is very ill-advised. But for the sake of the story, we can see why he was chosen. I was glad that the story acknowledged he would have to be in full disguise, as a human pod racer is very rare, especially a child, just a few years after he won the famous boon to Eve. As the mission unfolds, Anakin reminisces about his time as a racer. He imagines an alternate life where his victory at Boon to Eve saw him win his freedom and become a superstar in the sport. He would travel the galaxy winning races and, of course, end up freeing his mother. He's upset that his identity needs to be hidden. He wants the accolades of being great at something. He wants word of his success to travel the galaxy, eventually getting back to Tatooine. This was another time where it was easy to see a young boy with the same fantasies, but knowing what ends up happening to Anakin, everything weighs heavier. There's some fun nods to be found here as well. For example, the suit that Anakin has to wear has a respirator. This is some on-the-nose foreshadowing, and there's also a familiar face that shows up in Ben Quadraneros, one of the pod racers from Episode 1. Anakin is unsure of his place as a Padawan, and Obi-Wan is unsure of his place as a knight and master, in the sense of having a Padawan, not his title. Obi-Wan keeps measuring his progress against his memories of Qui-Gon Jinn. Much of Obi-Wan's dialogue and guidance here sounds like Obi-Wan that hasn't evolved yet. It's him trying to be Qui-Gon. I like it best when there's little bits of the prequel and Clone Wars versions of Obi-Wan that come through. Circumstances of the mission cause Obi-Wan to physically pull back. He can no longer be seen at Anakin's side or around the races. The two have a private communicator, but the distance has Anakin worried. Anakin Anakin's in his element when he's allowed to race. These sequences are pretty exciting and do a good job at keeping you in the story. Being that this is an audio-only story, the extra layers of sound design under the narration add a lot to a sequence that should only work visually. The racing in question is also a tournament, so there are multiple races. The story doesn't get us bogged down in so much of the courses or standings or what each race is, but we get enough to carry us to the next. The story is primarily targeted at audiences on the younger side. It would be called a middle grade reader or a young adult if it was a more traditionally published piece, rather than a performed one. Obi-Wan sees Anakin at his happiest when he's back doing all the racing. He's a little stiff about it at first and softens after some memories of Qui-Gon taking him on unorthodox missions. He even remembers promising himself that when he got a Padawan of his own, he would not do the same. This was a really nice character moment, but I might be biased because personally, I can't get enough of the Qui-Gon Obi-Wan relationship. As Obi-Wan carries out his own part of the mission, he encounters battle droids, which he dispatches easily. There's no description that makes it too clear what kind they are. They aren't called B-1s by name, but I stumbled into a statement from the author, Miller, where he states that these were in fact B-1s. The same type that Obi-Wan fights on Naboo and, of course, throughout the Clone Wars. As the plot develops, Anakin's attitude begins to flip. He can no longer disappear into the familiarity of racing and is missing the structure and safety of the Jedi Order. I liked seeing him embrace his new life. We all know Anakin becomes Vader, but Anakin has a full life as a talented Jedi Knight first, and this is part of getting there. As the racing becomes more dire and the parallel to his larger mission is bearing down on him, Anakin is able to show some growth. He shows constraint, is able to control his temper, and plans moves in the moment that help set him up for future successes. The racing becomes a metaphor for his life as a Padawan. My favorite reference to another Star Wars story is Obi-Wan having to face a Marian, the big gross squid-like creature from Rogue One that could read minds and really break someone's brain. Obi-Wan had to use meditation techniques he learned as a youngling to combat it, showing his strong foundation in traditional Jedi training. Anakin can actually feel Obi-Wan in these moments, showing that the bond between them is forming strong. For much of the story, things are a bit contentious between the two, so honest moments like this go a long way. Circumstances that would go too far into spoiler territory have Anakin disenchanted with racing. With this taken away from him, he has a hard time feeling like he belongs anywhere in the galaxy. This comes across very true to a confused adolescent boy, and not just because he's powerful in the Force. These grounding moments for the character are some of the best, though subtle, bits of the entire story. Something else the story nails is Anakin not being able to do absolutely everything himself. Yes, of course, he's Anakin Skywalker. He's naturally gifted in the Force more than anybody, and becomes one of the greatest Jedi. He's the chosen one. He's more powerful than any Jedi. But at this point, he's still an insecure kid feeling alone in a massive galaxy. He's capable when he's confident and needs help from his mentor, father/brother figure Obi-Wan, and the seeds of their future relationship are all there. There was another little something that I didn't quite care for at the end of the story. This takes place after the ultimate conclusion of Padawan's pride, so it's not really a spoiler, but eventually Anakin reveals his real identity and comes clean as being a Jedi. Now, Jedi were very plentiful in this time period, yes, of course, but it just seems like a really big, bold move, and whatever the galactic tabloids and rumor mills were would definitely have caught wind of this and ran with it. The idea here was that some of this goes back to Anakin's early story wish fulfillment, where he would be a successful racer and word would get back to his mother so she knows he's okay, but it just came across as way too prideful for a Jedi. Yes, he's still 12, we just covered all that. It just felt a little wrong, and not only that, but unnecessary. A little lesson in humility here I think would have fit better. As Master and Apprentice reunite, Anakin is feeling more sure of his future. Obi-Wan talks to another legendary Jedi about the gap that Qui-Gon left in his life. He gets some guidance that has the Obi-Wan we know and love from the prequels and Clone Wars show up. Padawan's pride was a cool way to spend some time with Anakin and Obi-Wan so early in their relationship. This would have been an amazing release to get in May for the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace given the proximity in the story. It's not something you have to hear. There are no ground groundbreaking revelations or major questions answered. If you're not into the middle grade or young adult fiction, check out Brotherhood to spend more time with these characters a bit later in their apprenticeship. Padawan's Pride is part of something called Star Wars Adventures Audible Originals, which is a cool thing that I had no idea existed. Now all of this is kind of sounding like a promo, but I promise you it's not. I was just excited to be surprised with a new Star Wars short story. My weekends the last couple months have been massively long and stressful work days, so it was nice to have 4 or so hours to escape back into the Star Wars universe with content I had no idea was coming. Check out this transmission next to keep going in the Star Wars universe.